everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz. And before we get to the meat of the show, I just want to let all of our listeners know that this is our quarterly book club podcast. If you are a patron, thank you so much. We are doing this in the winter of 2025, actually. I just caught it because it should just be 2025. And if you're listening to this in like 2026, well, thank you so much for listening to the show and subscribing. But, you know, that's all right. You could have listened to this a year ago. Patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, and you get 2 CEs for listening. Anyway, we're going to do this book club a little bit differently because before we were able to start recording, we had the chance, or at least I had the chance, to speak to the author of our book. So we're going to be talking at length about Susan Schneider's The Science of Consequences. Usually we start with our thoughts and then we get into the book, but we're actually going to start with an interview with Dr. Schneider talking about the book and her current work. So we're going to do that, and then we'll come back in and have our discussion with our book club group, who I'll introduce then. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our deluxeified book club on The Science of Consequences. All right. So I am here very, very excited to be talking with Dr. Susan Schneider about her book, The Science of Consequences, which we did our whole book club episode about. We had a nice long discussion about it, but it's nice that we thought whatever we thought. But why don't we check in with Susan about the book as the person who created it, or at the very least summed up her research, other people's research into a nice coherent whole. And speaking of that, Susan, would you mind just kind of introducing yourself to the audience and saying a little bit more about you than I think my bio I did probably won't have done it justice?
Okay, and I haven't seen the bio, at least I don't remember, but right. How far back do you want me to go?
As much as you feel like sharing leading up to the book. You know, this is your time, so you go into whatever detail you think is helpful.
Okay, and I'd love to hear more about the discussion that the book club had too.
Sure, yeah.
If you can bring any of that up, that would be great.
I will.
I started out in engineering in the 1970s and 80s, but ran into some obstacles because of my gender. So it was good for a while, but yeah, again, there were enough issues that after a bit, I switched over. I should say I joined the Peace Corps and did that for a while. Yeah, so that was exciting. And then after that, I switched to behavior analysis. I had read B.F. Skinner's book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, in high school for a psychology class for which we got college credit in our senior year, and been very impressed by it. So that was always kind of in the background for me as a possibility. So I got my PhD at University of Kansas, working with Ed Morris, and then had an academic career, and for a while switched around, and then was chatting with people about why there wasn't a book like The Science of Consequences out there that would try and integrate behavior analysis with related fields, including the important role it plays in nature-nurture relations, which I knew something about because I studied that in graduate school, developmental psychobiology, and I worked for 5 years as a developmental psychobiologist at Florida International University. So I had that background. I did mathematical modeling of behavior for my dissertation and some of the research after that in various academic institutions. And I taught a wide range of classes, including cognitive and social, and loved teaching intro, which of course covers everything. And so I thought, here's learning principles, operant and Pavlovian both, that are such a critical part of all these other areas of the behavioral sciences. And can we have a book for the public out there that will kind of integrate everything together with examples, that's not too technical, that covers the range, and that has some, humor, ideally, and enough of interest, So I never thought I would do it. But that's the way it worked out. I saw an opening there. I realized, actually, maybe I have enough background in all these interdisciplinary areas, as well as in the core of behavior analysis, to do justice to this. So it took me 10 years, Rob.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, the book definitely reads as very well lived and well researched. So the 10 years is not as surprising in terms of just the breadth of information there. So
I am so glad to hear that. Yeah, that was part-time at first, of course. Yeah, I started it in the year 2000. And I finally finished it in 2011. The last couple of years, I worked on it full-time. I got an agent. I got a Manhattan agent. I was all excited about that. Yeah. Created a website and read books about how to publish a book about science for the public. Yeah.
Wow. So there's a lot going on. I mean, well, one of the things I was curious about, because we came to this book as a group, we did an episode on storytelling. So your book was cited in one of the articles about why don't behavior analysts do more in storytelling? And your book was cited as an example of here's a way to tell stories that are both scientific and readable and understandable. So we did a poll for the year. We do 4 book clubs a year because books can take a long time to read. And we put Science of Consequences as one of the options. And so that was one of the top choices. So we did that as our second book of the year. And it definitely had that storytelling vibe to it. But I'm wondering, when you were writing it, over the span of 10 years, I'm guessing there were a couple different variants, because there were components of the book that I sort of was like, I bet there's like a real good deep dive into some of the genetics, like even more than this. But there are also sections too that I wondered, like, this feels like it's getting a little technical. I wonder, is there a version that was, let's gloss this over. Let's make this more pop psychology than behavior analytic or behavioral or, biological or psychobiological, whichever area of the book it was. Can you kind of tell me about how you went back and forth with making something that tried to hit that sweet spot in between really nice and scientific and really readable to non full-time scientists?
That's a really good question, Rob. And I went back and forth. There were so many judgment calls about things like that during the course of this odyssey. The nature nurture section was the hardest to try and hit the sweet spot because I wanted to cover a topic like epigenetics because behavior analysis principles are very much involved with what goes on with this phenomenon where environmental, actions and experiences affect the likelihood that one of your genes will be expressed to produce the protein it codes for. And there was just, I tried my best. I tried my best to make it understandable and not too technical, but invariably when I got responses afterward about the book, if this came up, that was the section where people said, it was a little technical in the nature nurture section. And I'm not surprised. But overall, the mathematical modeling section too, I do refer to differential equations at one point, but I don't go into too much detail with that, this is one of the reasons it took 10 years. I mean, first of all, of course, you have to decide the range of your coverage and then start lining up references and topics you're going to include versus topics that you're not going to include. And that in itself was just, it took forever. It helped to get some chapters written toward the beginning of this phase. Like chapter 1, I actually wrote fairly early on in the process because I knew what I wanted to cover in that chapter. But the other chapters, and the length of the book related to, of course, how much I was going to cover. At first, it was, I think, more than the 16 chapters it ended up being. And then I pared that down, I think, to 12 for a while, but that wasn't enough. And so, it's just an ongoing search for the happy medium where you cover the things that you think are most important to cover in a readable way. And you have chapters, hunks of chapters
Mm-hmm.
that fit reasonably neatly and that lead reasonably neatly one into the other, to create that sense of story, like we're going somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's 3 overall sections to the book, of course, but within each section, I tried hard to have that sense of not just, okay, here's this area and then here's this area and plunk them down at random,
Yeah.
but to have a more logical order.
Okay, so that makes sense in terms of, trying to do that storytelling piece of there has to be an order to I'm presenting this information in a way that's building, and then here's where it stops and we start the next related but different section.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of the content of the book really relies on the research examples to, tell like little mini stories within the overarching kind of, scientific narrative that you're presenting. I'm curious how you chose those samples. Were they just sort of like, these are recent research articles that I think capture the point? They were ones that maybe you were at a dinner party and somebody mentioned, I read an article in Nature about, whatever the topic was, some of the animal research, right? And you said, ooh, that sounds like I'm going to look into that. That's going to capture it because someone who doesn't know science like I do is bringing it up. So it must have valence for the broader audience. Or was it kind of just like, no, I like this research, that's the one that's doing it?
I had done a lot of reading myself over the years at that point. I had kept notes. I taught all these courses. I was reading the literature, and of course I did a lot of literature searches. I mean, the book ended up with over 700 references.
Well, that's my wife said, because I usually finish the books first as the group, because then I have to lead the discussion. And she's like, I'm not going to get this book is so long. And I'm like, don't worry. There's like 120 pages of references. It's not as long as it looks.
Exactly. And that was the choice of the publisher to have that in that font. I think if they'd made it finer print, it would have been more typical. But right. But this way, of course, it's easier for people to track down a reference.
Oh, yeah.
So, right. Yes. But as to where I got them all from, right. Of course, sometimes just literature searching for examples, a lot from my own reading and from my own teaching. I did have a number of people who very kindly helped me along the way. People who were experts in areas where I was especially less expert, like some of the applied areas. I knew the basics. I went to Kansas after all, and I taught some of that. But so I had people also in other areas like developmental psychobiology that I could consult, and they sometimes had suggestions too. But mainly, I would get together things that I thought would work for a chapter and come up with a draft and then shoot it out there, and then and see how the research findings that I had located fit in. Could I in fact write about this particular finding in a way that made it work for that chapter? Right. Yeah. It was. Yeah. I kept detailed documents on my computer with ideas for each chapter, which again changed when the chapters changed somewhat. But and so I'd have a lot to pick from, and not everything made it to the final version. It was a winnowing process. I had more than I could use, basically. So I just did my best to pick examples that would illustrate the concepts well, I thought, and be fun to read about where possible, have applications to people's ordinary lives or to challenges like the last chapter, where, of course, I included climate change and other societal level challenges. That's not typically an area that a lot of behavior analysts work on, but our principles apply there like everywhere else. And so that was one of those areas where I had to read outside of the field.
Now, I know one of the dangers, and this came up when we were sort of, doing some of our own research review on storytelling or how to disseminate information. I mean, it's one of the things that we do on the show every week. Do you ever feel, or did you ever get nervous that you were spending too much time trying to make interesting stories and then maybe not capturing the idea? And if so, how did you kind of pull yourself back and kind of use an example to illuminate? Like, was there like a strategy that you tried to use? Did you sort of like put the example, describe it to yourself, to kind of reflect on, is that capturing the general idea of, say, nature, nurture, or using some of the consequence, responses you lay out that relate to, say, climate change or, other societal ills that is sort of in the back half of the book? Like, what were those steps? So, for example, if I were going to write another book, I haven't written a book, but if I were going to write a book and I wanted to do good storytelling, I didn't make it too fluffy. I didn't just make it story after story, and they don't really lead to anything. Like, I'm just curious because it feels like such a hard task.
Yeah, it was. It was. I think Skinner's own article about how to discover what you have to say, right, really captures a lot of the nuance for anyone writing any kind of project. You get the ideas down. If it's a database book like this is, then you got your references somewhere, and then you kind of shift them around and see what order might work, and then you actually make a stab at writing, and then you realize, oops, nope, that's not going to work, and you switch things around. And I mean, sometimes things change to a different chapter entirely. It was very much trial and error. I mean, I had a fair bit of writing experience at that point, but mainly academic writing, right? Not for the public, but I've always been a reader, and I like nonfiction as well as fiction. And so I saw how people like Stephen Jay Gould, to give a shining example there, was able to write very good science for the public in a very readable way. And there's a number of other people who've been very successful with that. Stuart Weiss, Paul Chance, to name two behavior analysts who've been very successful in reaching the public with their books. And in all kinds of other areas, of course. So I had models to go from, and I tried to make my book kind of like theirs. Again, I didn't want to go academic. I didn't want it to be a textbook. But I love Karen Pryor, but I wanted it to be more in depth than, let's say, let's Don't Shoot the Dog, her classic, million book bestseller. I think, back in the day, it's such a wonderful accomplishment. But that was a short book that just took some of the basic principles and then had a great range of applications with people as well as with animals. But I wanted to do something more in-depth than that, more like a Stephen Jay Gould, basically. So, and then as I actually started putting it together, and then once you get a few chapters actually written, Rob, then you have a voice for that book. And then the other chapters all have to match that. So that really helped. Once I had the first few chapters written, and they weren't big, and they weren't like chapters 1 and 2, although chapter 1, I think, was one of the first ones. They were scattered throughout the book there. But nonetheless, I had a way of writing for the book, and a length too. I don't know if you noticed, but the chapters are roughly equivalent lengths. Books don't have to be like that. Sometimes authors have them really short chapters and then a really long chapter.
I think of, reading Verbal Behavior, and you get to chapter 3 and you're like, why is this like 200 pages? It's not that, but it's like, this is too long. Like, it's only chapter 3, man. Let's hurry it up.
I didn't want really long chapters, but I didn't want really short ones either. I wanted, again, a happy medium there. And once I had a few chapters actually written, then that was a wonderful way for me to see, okay, here's how these remaining topics I want to cover can fit in to that kind of length and format. And then, things just fell into place at one point. It was beautiful. The 16 chapters, the 3 sections. Yeah. And then it was just a matter of, the writing.
Did you find, when you're speaking about voice, did you find yourself writing and thinking, well, let me write this with the voice that I would teach in, which is going to be very different than, like you said, writing a research paper or, a letter to a friend, right? Did you find that you were sort of capturing that voice, or was your writing for the public voice different even than your teaching voice?
It was kind of like teaching intro psych, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, not that can't be technical sometimes, but, you've got often students from all different areas. They're not all psych majors by any means. And so you have to reach them in ways that get them interested in the topics and learning the science that's important for them to learn. Mm-hmm. But it's not like a senior level or graduate level course where you really get into the weeds and very technical and do academic readings, right? So I guess that's the closest I could say. I just loved teaching intro psych, because I could make all these connections, and not just learning principles, of course, but that was one of the main ones, because they are applying everywhere. I mean, every single chapter in the psych textbook, there's going to be learning principles, operant, respondent, or both. And I wanted students to see how everything fits together. And I valued these closely related sciences like cognitive and social and developmental psychobiology and biology and economics, for that matter, behavioral economics and all that. Mm-hmm. And being able to show how all of this relates, I think it's just such a satisfying, important thing, because there's so many applications everywhere. Mm-hmm. It still is a source of joy when I see that somewhere, and a source of disappointment when I don't.
Yeah. I know the section, I think the four of us, we had four folks doing the discussion of the book. I know we found the first section the most interesting is not quite the word, but I mean, certainly the second section was more on kind of the science of consequences specifically related to behavior and schedule. So again, that was very, very, familiar to all of us, well, all of us behavior analysts. And then certainly the third chapter, we've done other reading on consequences and bigger picture things. It was very interesting, but I think it was that first chapter and really thinking about the nature nurture, the power of, genes, and how consequences can affect genes, and genes therefore affect consequences, and therefore it affects evolution, that I think we all were just the most rapt interest about, because it was so different, nothing there, because, the goal was not to write something no one had ever spoken about necessarily. It was to summarize, but just seeing it all in one place was fascinating. I mean, I don't think you could have. I was going to ask the question, like, were you thinking of starting the book differently? But I don't know if you can, because so much of what the book is about has to do with that just universal consequence of human development and evolution. I'm sort of curious. Was that just something that you felt? You'd been talking about in intro psych, or you just thought that captured that idea of bringing together all the sciences? Were you ever worried that maybe that was going to go beyond what people could handle in a book about consequences?
That was certainly a challenging part to write, but you absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Rob. This was so exciting for me personally when I first discovered it in the mid-1980s when I was a graduate student at the University of Kansas, right? Ed Morris has always been interested in that area too. I took a graduate course in developmental neurobiology with a neuroscientist who was in the department at that time. And that just, I could tell you after the book tour, if I hadn't felt that it was important for me to work on climate change and really switch to that, because it is such an existential crisis for the future. Yeah, for now, for that matter, right? What I would have liked to have done would have been to go back to developmental psychobiology, because it's just such a fascinating area. And you have all these scientists from all these different areas working together productively, integrating these different sciences and showing how much flexibility there is. And so much of it is driven by learning principles. And so behavior analysis is a really important part of that mix. And it's just such an exciting area. But yeah, I decided to do climate change instead. But I'm glad that I did get to work in that area for a while.
Sure. I know one of the things that I was sort of going back and forth with while reading the book was whether I thought this should be classified as a radical behaviorist book, or whether that's sort of a silly question in that, well, radical behavior at the end of the day, radical behaviorism is really what is happening in real life, but we have to give it a name so that, the cognitivists and the mentalists of the world don't get too offended that we're honing in on their turf. Is that something you've ever felt in terms of writing the book or in general, or do you really think there is a place for like, no, this is radical behaviorism, this is psychobiology, like, binning our sciences?
Yeah, I sometimes, you could see that there's reasons to do that, but I prefer just to have science and everyone working together productively with our different special backgrounds, of course, different areas of expertise. But I actually, back in 1987, I think, I published a paper on the term radical behaviorism, a history paper on how that term came to be. That actually, I think, probably after the book, is my most cited work, although I have, of course, did a number of empirical papers and a number of other conceptual papers, too. But yeah, that's gotten a lot of reads now on ResearchGate. It was in the Behavior Analyst, right? And of course, the term really means thorough. Radical, not in the sense of extreme, but radical in the sense of including private events and not being, other forms of behaviorism that did not. Skinner did always include private events. And so I hope I wrote the book in a way that, and I think from the feedback I've gotten, I seem to have succeeded to some degree anyway in making it accessible and fair to all of these related sciences as well as the core behavior analysis.
I definitely agree. It was a science book that happened to have a huge focus on behavior and the impact of everything that, everything around us, the organism in the environment, right? You can't write about it without talking about environment and then internal, external states, right?
Exactly.
Susan, I'm going to ask you, this is kind of related to one of the questions that I was, planning to ask, but I think I have to tweak it a little bit. I'm going to ask it a little bit of a professional courtesy question. I have to change it. So while we're talking about the idea of, certainly genes and the environment and development and evolution as a consequence, as well as respondent and operant conditioning, something I have run into a lot more recently. It's not a new phenomenon. I didn't find it. It's been the same issue that's been going on since back in the 50s and the 60s when it comes to behavior versus mental states, is just this return to the idea that operant behavior has to do with when we're being good and bad little, humans. And everything else is, well, but you can't explain the anxiety that people are having or the stress that people are having through operant principles and through the principles of behavior. That's its own magical thing. Often I am told this, and then somebody gives me a very specifically behavioral explanation of how they're going to treat the behaviors that are recurring. However, they just happen to magically live in the mind. So therefore, don't worry about it, Rob. That's not your scene. How do I go about having these conversations with people in a way that is focused on the science of consequences rather than just my getting offended at their lack of understanding of operant behavioral principles. Because I'll be honest, I've got a professional development day coming up in about a week or two, and I'm already planning to, stand up and yell at the speaker because I know that's what they're bringing to this talk. And I'd rather not, because, I do like my job. So help me out here. How do I put it all together in a way like you did without just sort of making it like a fighting match?
Oh boy, yeah, and I agree on trying to avoid that if possible. Certainly. Oh gosh, yeah, we've tried so hard over the years to get operant principles accepted in colleges of education, right? When you talk about emotions and things like anxiety, of course, I think it's helpful that cognitive behavioral approaches are the main data-based way of addressing these, right? And that certainly includes behavior analysis as well as cognitive and other parts of psychology. So, yeah, if finding places where most people can agree is a good place to start, right? Yeah, and to avoid the fighting. And at some level, it's just language. If what people do is effective, then how they talk about it may not be ideal. But if that's what you've been raised with, I mean, like Skinner said, right, the organism's always right, and people just on the face of it don't think about behavior-environment relations acting over time like behavior analysts are trained to do. Yeah, and so that's part of it too, I think. But yeah, I mean, this is not something I've had to do. I hand it to all of you who do. And again, just behavior analysts have always had to work across disciplinary lines, right? And in some areas, we've been very effective with that, like speech language, right? Pathology. Not to say it's always perfect, but we've had a lot of success for decades in that. In some of the other areas too, behavioral pharmacology, obviously. Whereas in education, certainly we have, I mean, thank goodness for, yeah, you know the one I'm thinking about here. That's in a third of the schools now. I'm blanking on it though.
PBI? You think of PBIS?
That's it. PBIS.
Yep.
Yes. Positive behavior support. Yes, exactly. Thank you. And I know that that's not just behavior analysis, but hopefully it's good science for the other aspects of behavioral science that's in there. And certainly there's a lot of positive reinforcement, which sounds good to me. Again, I'm not an expert on that, although I do try and go to those talks at ABA when I can. This was another source of great information for me over the years. I've been going to ABA every year since 1985.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you have like a shirt or something that like they can...
I ought to. Well, was it the last one where it was my 40th year? So I did get a little sticker or something.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So any sort of like specifics when, talking about things like, feelings or sensitivities that you might use as a good example, having had so many examples in your book, using so many examples to describe any that come to mind when you're trying to talk about consequences and their impact on, thoughts or those kind of human ephemera.
Right. Well, first of all, for emotions, I cover the at various places in the book, but especially in the chapter on classical conditioning, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much involved with classical conditioning, which would be nice to think it's in some of the colleges of education. I don't know.
I think they just go Pavlov and dogs. Anyway, moving on. We're not doing any more with it.
Yeah, that's not going to be real helpful, is it? Yeah, because going back to Skinner's era, some of the research he did himself with emotions, with classical conditioning, right? Conditioned suppression, things like that, right? So, and I can't believe I'm remembering all this because, believe me, for many years now, I have focused so much on climate change.
It's in there. It's in the repertoire or the relational frames or enough stimuli related for your, cue your memory, right?
It must be. It's kind of encouraging. I'm getting up there in years now. So anyway, there are so many examples, right? Operants and Pavlovian processes interacting, and feelings are real in animals as well as people, and how you deal with problematic feelings, is often cognitive behavioral therapy, which is based in part on learning principles, right? Mm-hmm. And it is for private events like thinking. Just a classic example there, when you ask a kid to do a simple arithmetic problem in their head, like how much is 2 + 2? And, you don't have to see them write it out, or a simple multiplication thing. But you know that whether they say it out loud or just think it, that a lot of the same things are happening in the brain. And now with these amazing science fiction neuropsychology, neuroscience techniques that they have, they can show this, right? I mean, it doesn't really add to the explanation, but we can flesh out what's happening in the brain. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's not just the brain; it's the rest of the nervous system. It's the glands. It's all the other bodily systems, right? That are involved too. There's a great book, by the way, called "Blaming the Brain." Because that's something else I notice sometimes, that neuroscience now, I just love what they've accomplished in that area, but it kind of supersedes everything else when people are trying to explain behavior. And we know that is not a good or thorough approach, that you need all the environmental aspects too. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, I think I'm kind of rambling here.
No, but I sort of hear that central idea of part of it is, turning into the skid. And I think a lot of behavior analysts, when they're freshly minted behavior analysts, or they're just focusing on the behavior and just operant conditioning, it is hard to then be able to switch gears, because so much of what you're getting from your environment is people talking about everything's the brain and everything's these magical homunculi feelings. Yeah. And how do you explain that without making it sound like you're discounting their existence? So I think I'm gonna sort of take a page from the book and just turn into the skid and just immediately be like, and you know what? Brain's behavior, bam, I agree. It's all together, but let's focus on what's going on in terms of like bigger picture, rather than getting too hung up on these are two different things, or these don't go together the same way, or the way you're describing it is not the right way, or because we don't necessarily know how every aspect of the neurons going across synapses to lead to behavior. But we know that's a piece of it. So let's all agree on that. And then, like you said before, focus on, what are the results we're getting? What are the changes we're seeing? And I like that.
Good.
I agree. I agree with that completely. So I'm hoping it is not too hard to do. I think sometimes, I'm sure you've faced this across the years, where people just they want to die on that hill of, no, the way I'm describing it is the only way and everyone else is wrong, even though we're talking about the exact same thing in 99%. Like the mouse and human genome being so similar. But
it's so important to build bridges and find common ground. And so often in other areas, we have to use different terminology, for example, because that's what people in those areas are used to. And so, and for their part too, when they're working at the edges of their discipline, they have to do the same thing. It's just a reality we all have to deal with, I think.
Mm-hmm. So
Good luck with that. Again, what you do is so important. And again, we have such a great science with so many applications, and there's just so much documented success out there. And I'm so glad that people like you are out there in the schools helping all these kids and teachers.
And the thing that I think makes me the most frustrated is so many of those techniques are very effective, and I've seen their effectiveness. And while they're not being described through behavioral principles, that's okay. Like, I'm okay with that. I've worked with enough professionals over my own career. It's similar to yours in some ways. Just you work with so many different people, you have to let some of those, who's in charge, who's right, kind of arguments go. But it just sometimes, some years I feel like I'm great at it, and some years it just rubs, like you just hear someone say, well, it's a little beyond behavior, and there's that tone of voice that you just getting under my skin. Talk about respondent condition. I'm like, oh, here we go. I'm having a little reaction. I'm salivating and I'm about to bite.
Oh, I can empathize.
So I know we spent a lot of time talking about the book, but I did want to also hear about how you made the shift into work on climate change and what that entails. As again, someone who is very aware of climate change. To be honest, I don't want to talk about climate change because it is very scary, like you said, existential crisis. But I'd love to hear about kind of the work that you are doing right now and some of the learnings about consequences and how that is going to result in the better, brighter tomorrow. I know we all would like to think is around the corner if we, if we think about our consequences.
Yes, indeed. Well, back in the 1970s, I had a course in solar engineering when I was an engineer at Illinois Tech. And then after I got my bachelor's and before I got my master's in mechanical engineering, I worked at U.S. Steel and did pretty, high-level energy efficiency task for a summer job and the continuous caster in the steel mill. And so also I was, I had a background in science generally. Okay, so in the late 1980s then, when Jim Hansen of NASA testified to Congress about the reality of climate change, I took it seriously. I read one of the first books for the public about climate change, Bill McKibben's book, The End of Nature.
Wow.
He was the presidential scholar at ABBA this year, of course. Mm-hmm. And I was on a symposium with him, which was a big thrill, right? And I started to follow it because I could see, this is real. This is going to be a problem in the 21st century. We need to act on this. And I've been an environmental activist and social justice activist my whole life. So that's been on my radar for a long time, Rob. Mm-hmm. I used to, just kind of do that kind of activity on the side because I had jobs and then I had the book and then for 3 years, a very full-time job doing the book touring. Mm-hmm. And then when that started to get more manageable, I said, okay, what's the most important thing I could do with my life? I'm able to switch to what I think is most important. And again, it would have been nice to go back to developmental psychobiology, it really would have, but there was just no question. We were, this was around 2015, 2016. Mm-hmm. And we were clearly not doing enough for climate action. And there was not enough emphasis on the behavioral science side because, heck, in the 1970s, I studied solar engineering. The basic physics there hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. You have economies of scale now. They've got better methods of engineering these panels, but the basic science has been there for a long time. Mm-hmm. So in many respects, meeting this challenge of climate action is a behavioral problem. Mm-hmm. Mostly policy, because that's been the most effective change process around the world for getting greenhouse gas emissions down and getting us moving toward this great transition to sustainability, including mainly renewable power, right? All the other elements to it. It's such a wicked problem. Again, there's just so many things that need to be done. It's not just a few, right? Mm-hmm. And again, the worst problems are delayed, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're suffering now because of all the greenhouse gases put up there in the 20th century and the early part of the 21st century, right? Mm-hmm. So it was just very clear to me that we needed more behavioral scientists working in this area. So I did all kinds of reading. And of course, behavioral science is all across the disciplinary range, from economics to all the variations of psychology, including behavior analysis. So we all have an important role to play. And in fact, behavioral economics is, I would think, the interdisciplinary approach that dominates in behavioral science approaches. But a big part of that is community level change, where you have an OBM kind of project for sustainability in a local business, a local government, a school district, or a particular school, neighborhoods, healthcare systems, that kind of level where it's not just individual by individual, but you can really scale up. And then hopefully, while you're scaling up these sustainability solutions, and these are behavior change projects, right? Yeah, so this is our bailiwick here, along with those of related behavioral sciences, right? Hopefully, people involved in those projects then start thinking more about this challenge and start, electing policymakers, making the policy changes that we need to. Hopefully, this goes together. Change working from the bottom up there, and change at the policy level from the top down, because we need it all as fast as possible, according to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is, of course, the main body of scientists. I mean, I do all kinds of things with climate change and have now for many years. One is tabling. And I always like to point out that according to the most recent IPCC report, we have to cut global greenhouse gas emissions 43% by 2030 compared to 2019 to stay on track for that 1.5 degree limit in global warming, which is, we're already at 1.2 now. And in fact, this last year, temporarily hope at 1.5. And it's just, I mean, well, I could go on and on and on forever about climate change, believe me. Anyway, I hope that answers the question.
That does. I know one of the areas that I always feel a bit distraught when talking about climate change is so much, especially when you talk about something like behavioral economics and looking at sort of what are the incentives. It does feel that so many incentives these days are lined up against policies that can meaningfully impact climate change in a positive direction, positive by, lowering the temperature.
Yeah.
And it does feel like a lot of the behavioral changes that I or my family make, we're using less less plastics. We're trying to recycle more. We're composting more. It just feels like one of those, like, that's great. It's not going to do it. That's not really where the change needs to happen. I mean, is it really one of those situations of we don't want to change our behavior back to wasteful, over consumerism, but is really the change going to have to, it really does just have to be at those kind of like big scale, kind of interlocking behavioral contingencies? And if so, I mean, it makes sense. It's an existential crisis.
It is. Electrifying everything is one of the big goals, because you can make the power sources for the electricity renewable. And I include nuclear in that because it is low carbon, and I think it's got to be part of the mix. Realistically, if we're going to get close to meeting this this deadline, basically, right? Yeah. For what individuals can do, there's been research on that, a lot of quantification out there. Again, I give a lot of talks about climate change, so I can say buying less stuff for the developed nations, although that's hard to quantify. There's a famous article by Wines and Nicholas in 2017 in Environmental Research Letters. That's one of the main journals, right? That has basically the 5 big ones for individuals being having a sustainable family size, using green energy, driving less, flying less, and eating a more plant-based diet. In particular, eating less beef. Beef is just off the charts. It has a huge carbon footprint. Chicken is actually better than some dairy. A lot of people don't realize that, who are vegetarians, who think they're doing good by the planet. But some cheeses are really not good. I mean, this is still cattle we're talking about. Yeah, right. So, yeah. Anyway.
That really took me a second of like, cheese comes from the ground. No, it's right. Sorry about that. I kind of was following the vegetarian path, and I got a little
exactly. Yeah. I've been mainly vegan for a number of years myself. I still do sustainable seafood, which has a low carbon footprint, and no one's asking anyone to give up beef or meat entirely. It's just in some nations, like the U.S. is one of them. We need to cut down on our per capita consumption of these things at the same time as we need to try and bike more. I try and be a role model here, right? I was a commuter cyclist from high school on, wherever I could be. These e-bikes now that are available are really revolutionizing transport around the world. So, especially in cities, of course, where you don't have really long distances to go, and they're much more carbon friendly. I bought a used electric vehicle 4 years ago, a used Chevy Bolt, which I love. So that's also important. I'm getting a heat pump next year. I have a heat pump water heater. I have solar panels. And I have cut down on mowing in California. Oh gosh, lawn services there. They have laws now to try and get people and lawn services to get off fossil fuels because those things are really inefficient. Those lawn mowers and those leaf blowers, in addition to being really noisy, which is funny because this is how places like Washington, D.C. got ordinances and Sacramento, either prohibiting them or limiting their use, more because of the noise than because of the carbon pollution and the air pollution. But there's electric alternatives. And so you have, you take the carrots approach with the rebates like the Inflation Reduction Act focuses on for things like solar panels and electric vehicles, et cetera. And then you can have regulations, which has actually been pretty effective according to the climate policy books that evaluate all of this. And we need social norms to change. So people in related sciences who are expert on getting that to happen, and social marketing. Gosh, community-based social marketing. This is a big thing in the behavioral sustainability world, and we need to get more funding for that because there's really good messaging out there with framing and all this that, again, not all that behavior analytic, although some of our principles are still there, but this is an important part of reminding people, cues, things like that, stimulus control, basically, as well as the incentive side. And then there's a lot of discussion about, okay, are we at the point now where we should be scaring people more? So that, this is your kid's future. This is already so harmful around the world. It's so unfair. Developing nations didn't cause this problem. They're suffering disproportionately. Where I was in the Peace Corps, I got sent to the South Pacific. They're losing their coral reefs. Okay, I could go on and on. Anyway, behavior analysis has an important role to play here. So that's one of the things I do is try and get more behavior analysts into this field, and helping to get these community level changes that we need.
It's fascinating, Susan. I know we don't have enough time to go over all the different ins and outs, but I appreciate you giving us kind of the 10,000 foot view of some of the work going on and some of the consequences at play there. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. This really is something that everyone needs to work on to the degree that they can. I hope they will.
Yeah. And my last thing I wanted to ask is you mentioned sort of offhand, I think some of it ended up in a little footnote at the bottom of the page on one of the sections, is that you had lunch with B.F. Skinner, and you brought your own lunch and you shared it together. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that story before I let you go, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, Rob. That's actually on my book website, scienceofconsequences.com. I was very fortunate to get to know Skinner early on. So I knew him during the last 10 or so years of his life. We would get together at opus sometimes and talk. But in this case, this was after I had written him, since I read that book when I was in high school, Beyond Freedom and Dignity. And I was in engineering school, graduate school at Brown University, and that wasn't that far from Harvard, of course. So, I forget if he suggested it or I did, but, we agreed to get together, and I went to his office, right, at Harvard, and we chatted. he was always interested in environmental issues. That was one of the things we had in common. Mm-hmm. And right, I had misunderstood his instructions. He was actually planning for us to go out to eat, but I took a lunch, and so we split. That's like peanut butter and jelly or something like that. We ate it right there in this office, and it was great. It was really so special for me.
Oh wow! Well, thank you for sharing. I just thought that was the coolest anecdote. So thank you for bringing it, sharing it with us, and adding some more details. PB&J and Skinner. That sounds like someone's blog or something. Well, Dr. Susan Schneider, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about the science of consequences, to talk about your current work with climate change, and to share some anecdotes from your career. We really appreciate getting this chance. It was really, really excellent. I know you have a conference coming up this weekend. I believe you mentioned, or there's a conference soon?
Yes, the Citizens Climate Lobby Conference. And this probably won't be released before then, but it's a Saturday afternoon Eastern Time. Mm-hmm. And that's a really good nonpartisan organization. And I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, Susan, thank you so very much for talking with us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you for the book as well.
Thank you for hosting, Rob. Really enjoyed this discussion.
Hi, do you want to be a BCBA, also known as a Board Certified Behavior Analyst?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts to get your graduate degree, just minutes outside of Boston.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education, dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years.
And our 2022 graduates had a 92% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy approved fieldwork placements, ethics mini handbooks, PhD levels professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland if interested.
And don't forget, our program is accredited by the Association of Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI, as a Tier 1 master's degree program.
Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu.
regiscollege.edu.
One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Bye.
Well, that was a great treat. We don't always get to talk to our authors, though when we do, it is always so much fun to kind of hear about the process of the book, where it came from, what they're hoping to share with audiences, whether that was what we got out of the book as well. So very exciting to talk to Dr. Schneider. Before we get into the rest of our book club episode, where we'll be discussing the book at length, I want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening to this episode in its entirety, you can earn 2 learning CEs. All you need to do is go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in your podcast episode notes and put in some key information, including 2 secret code words. I'm going to give you the first one of those now. It's Yule. Y-U-L-E. 'Tis the season, Yule. Or is it the season? It's kind of over right now, right? And depending on when you're hearing this, it may be way over. But at the time of our recording, it's on our minds, Yule. All right. Oh, and don't forget, if you are a patron of the show, you also will have a code word in your RSS feed on your podcast player for 2 CE discount. So no charge for you patrons. A big thanks for us. But you still have to listen to the rest of the episode, which is coming up right now. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Schneider. And now let's get into our main book club discussion. But I couldn't do that without my book club crew. Joining me, as always, are...
Hey, Rob. It's me, Diana Perry Cruz. It's 2025, which means I'm going to go first in the second place introductions.
Yeah, and I am now third. I'm rounding it out, the trifecta of co-hosts, but not today because it's a book club day.
Do you want to say who you are?
That means I'm here. Oh, sorry. That means I'm here. Alan Haberman, your book club guy.
All right. Well, we got the crew together. We have been reading and we finished, and now we're recording our discussion of The Science of Consequences by Dr. Susan Schneider. And we're going to start kind of with a little bit of a bio about the book, where it came from, and then we'll talk about our thoughts, and then we'll get into some details about the book. So this book was published in 2012, and the reason it entered our poll for this year, for the 2025 to 26 year, as voted on by our patrons, was because it was mentioned in an article by Heinlein that we did as our episode on storytelling. And it was mentioned that The Science of Consequences was a good example of how behavior analysts could do a better job using stories to explain key behavioral principles. So we threw it on there and said, well, we love stories, and we loved that topic, and we love dissemination, and we love new ways of disseminating to beyond just an audience of behavior analysts. So let's see if this book does it. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Dr. Susan Schneider got a degree in mechanical engineering from Brown, and then a degree in psychology in the University of Kansas. And she also worked in the Peace Corps. She currently is teaching at Western Michigan University and has been doing a lot of work recently as for nonprofits related to climate change. And that's sort of her big push now is Science of Consequences plus ecology equals solutions to climate change. And she has been she's published a lot on the idea of consequences and on context and systems theory. So she's definitely a behavior analyst. And she also has a fun story on her webpage describing back when she was an undergraduate or an engineering graduate student. A brief anecdote is that she was close enough to go to Harvard to visit B.F. Skinner. And he said, yes, please, let's come and have some lunch. But she misunderstood his instructions and brought a bag lunch to eat while meeting with Skinner. And the two of them shared that lunch. So she's OG behavioral scientist here. And she had a shared lunch with B.F. Skinner. But is that enough to write a book about consequences? I mean, yes, probably. All the other stuff probably helps too. So let's get into kind of general thoughts. Who'd like to kick us off with some general thoughts on The Science of Consequences? Kind of from the context of, is this a book for behavior analysts? Is this a book for non-behavior analysts? Is this a book for everybody, or possibly a book for nobody?
I'll go first. I think this is a fun read for a behavior analyst. I don't think it is like I'm going to learn something new about behavior analysis book about behavior analysts, right? But I love the interplay between the different fields. So I thought that was really interesting. And something that I haven't conceptualized before. I think that this would be, if I was going to give someone this book to read, I would give it to undergraduate students in an intro psychology course who don't necessarily know about behavior analysis, but maybe this would be their first foray into looking into behavior analysis. So that's who I think it would be good for. Or maybe my, some of my relatives might enjoy this book. But I don't think it was specifically written for a behavior analyst. It's not only a behavior analyst could read this book. Absolutely not, right? It is a walk. It is a meandering walk down a coastal path.
Of consequences.
Of consequences, right? There's going to be a lot of things that we see along this path. And sometimes it diverts to the ocean and sometimes it diverts to the wood, but we always get back on the path.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is a book for anybody, personally. Here's what I say. I think this is a book that could be enjoyed by anyone, but written by very few people in the whole wide world. So I feel very lucky that Dr. Susan Schneider took the time to write this book, because her voice comes through so clearly and enjoyably in this book. You feel her personality through her writing, which is great. And I know that that's why this is recommended, is because it does such a good job of storytelling. We don't have another book really like this in our field, to my knowledge. And what it reminds me of the most is the style and approach of someone like Malcolm Gladwell, right? So it's taking really big picture theoretical ideas and distilling them down. Like she has to distill them down, right? But then she's turning that around into exemplars. It's exemplar after exemplar after exemplar, explaining to us why we should care about these bigger theoretical concepts. And it's done in a way where anybody can have something in there that they read and say, that makes sense to me. I have a similar story, or I have another way of looking at that, or I never thought of it that way, but this could be applicable in my own situation, right? So I think that there is a lot to take away from this book, and a lot of people it's really accessible to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, I sort of felt that this was a patchwork quilt where the common motif was consequences and sort of the science of behavior.
Yeah.
I feel like the two really strong parts of this book are for people in our field are the glossary, because I feel like her definitions for these things, and then obviously her examples that she's referencing them in throughout the chapters, are very accessible for us to be able to, when we are supposed to avoid jargon, that would be very helpful. I also felt that the emphasis she has on evolutionary biology and just like biological examples is something that we as behavior analysts, like we don't do that as much as we definitely should.
Yeah.
And so that was another strong point that, we have a lot in common with the natural sciences, and we should be really close to that. And I think just the only thing that somewhat detracts from the book is it's from 2012, and there's been so much change in our field and our science in that time. But it's a book for anybody, and as a good intro to just behaviorist thinking, that it's still a good, strong read, as like Jackie said, especially for like undergraduates who may be wanting to explore psychology and be exposed to behaviorism.
I think for me, one of the challenges I run into when I read a book is that at this point in my life, we've done so many book clubs and podcasts about articles, is that I either read books because I just want to learn something kind of fun and then immediately use it, or I read books because I need to discuss them at length on this show. Those are kind of the books that...
You read anything for fun?
Oh no, a lot of the things I read for fun, I read because there's something I want to learn out of them that is fun. Like I find learning fun. I'm not against learning, but there's learning for fun, and then there's learning for fun. Plus, I then have to host a show about
sometimes care too much.
A long discussion. And with this book, I actually found when I went back to read my notes and sort of remembered how I had documented my thoughts on the book as we went through it, the things I wanted to remember and anecdotes, it really clicked much better in that format of like, oh yeah, this is like Jackie said, this is kind of that walk on the coast, and at the end, kind of a fun little journey. But as I was reading it, when I'd read it in chunks, it would be interesting. And then when I tried to look at it as a cohesive whole, I sometimes would struggle, because I think I was trying to read it for the purpose that perhaps it was not documented for. This is not a book like something like Anthony Biglin's Nurture Effect, which is another book that's for everybody. That book had a very much a structure of, I'm going to teach you some things and give examples, and now you have more information and you will go act on that. Whereas I feel like the Science of Consequences, its mission was not so specific. It was very much like, when you're done, you will understand the idea that we interact in systems, and that how those systems interact with us changes so much of every aspect of our lives, from evolutionary perspectives down to how you hang out with your spouse. And it was more of just getting that concept rather than, when you're done with this, you'll understand schedules of reinforcement, and you'll definitely understand. And by the end, I think that it definitely had that goal more of, okay, but now that we know this, why aren't we using this knowledge to make the world a better place? So it did sort of start coming to that.
I don't think that was the point of the book either. Mm-hmm. I think that the thesis of the book is the influence of consequences is indisputable. Mm-hmm. For biological creatures, period, right? And that's what it kept coming back to. Like if she were arguing in a courtroom, that would be the argument. And she lays out so much evidence and science-backed evidence as well. There's tons of footnotes in here that I, as the jury reading this book, I have to agree with her at the end.
Did you disagree about consequences before?
No.
If she were to ever do another example, I feel this is just for me. I feel like she would do a great job of adding a sort of like bow or another layer using like functional contextualism, which people weren't really talking about.
Yeah.
At this time, but I feel like that would be she would be really good at explaining that mindset and tying consequences to that broader picture of functional contextualism.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, I think it also, the book kind of reads like a really good keynote. At the end of that keynote, you're not supposed to say, I've learned so much about topic. You're supposed to say, I am so excited about topic. I want to learn more. And I don't want to kind of denigrate the book in that there were so many examples. So if you want to drill down on a few of them, you're definitely going to be able to learn more. But I don't know if that's the point. I think the examples, the switching from animal to human, different contexts, different subjects, the quickness of the chapters, I think really is more to just give everyone as thorough a flavor of how consequences impact lives than to teach any one of them to you. But if I know I personally was very excited to learn more about some of like the neurology piece, consequences related to genetics, because that's not something I often, I don't think I've learned about that or really thought about that since graduate school. Usually it's more about consequences and, society, social behaviors. So that part was, I think, probably the most I learned from the book in the way we think of learning from a book. A lot of good examples, a lot of good animal research. So there was a lot there. So again, if you are a behavior analyst listening to this and you say, well, should I read this book because I will learn so much about consequences? I mean, you might, if you'll listen to the rest of this discussion and you might hear some parts that sound like a good kind of primer. Great. But if you just sort of want to get an example of different ways to talk about consequences in a very thorough way, I think we had fun with different sections of the book. And if you find a section you don't like, this book moves really fast. So don't worry. There'll be another anecdote or section that you'll be picking up very soon after. So it definitely moves in a way you don't think of.
Rob, do you want to tell us what those 3 sections are?
Yes, I do. Are we all ready? Everyone good with their thoughts?
We are good. Yep.
All right. So in terms of the makeup of the book, we've got 3 sections. There's one looking at sort of the biological picture of nature and nurture and how consequences impact us at a biological and a neurological and a genetic level. The second section looks a lot at schedules of reinforcement and impact on behavior. So that would sort of be the behavior analysis light section of the book. And then the final section is really on the applications of consequences in the lives of organisms at the individual and then at the last chapter at the societal level. So again, kind of starting with individual interactions in a number of ways. So autism treatment, addiction treatment, social discrimination, and then climate and overfishing, right? It starts getting at the big picture issues in the book. So again, I think part 1 was the most interesting to me personally. Did any of you have a part that you said that's the one that I would, if I were going to reread a part, that's the one I'd reread? Part 1, probably. Mm-hmm. Then I made a face like, no, I know this. I don't either. I'm moving on to the next book. What? Was that not your face?
No, I don't know if I had a favorite part. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I thought part 3 was just sort of interesting to see a broader application and then part 2, really just the behavior analysis light. It's nice to go back and be like, oh yeah, there are people who maybe haven't had exposure to this and I need to have their perspective on what these things mean.
I think that was a challenge in reading the book, though, is we know everything that's in part 2. We know schedules of reinforcement. And while I don't know every example of animal research related to schedules of reinforcement, there's nothing brand new out of there. So for me, it was like, well, this is a fun way to explain it. This feels like it makes sense, but I don't know if it does because I can't take out our context of there. So that'll be something we can look at when we get there. All right, so part 1, consequences and how nature nurture really works. So the first chapter really gets into a lot of the origins of consequences and really talking about how, and I think this book definitely does this throughout, the idea of sort of humans are not some sort of like magical creature that has evolved to be beyond any of this. You know, much like the flatworm that 500 million years ago had the first, you know, what we'd consider high neural features, can learn about consequences. So can you. You can do it too. If a flatworm can do it, you can as well. And, you know, really this...
You're talking about the tardigrade, though, because I just love that little guy.
Did the tardigrade learn from consequences?
Oh, of course. Yeah, he's way more advanced than this flatworm, but he's just so adorable. Have you seen his picture?
He's like a little bear.
He looks like a little teddy bear, so he's got a weird, like, alien suction face.
He looks like Zuckuss from Star Wars.
I know this is unrelated. I just wanted to talk about it.
Okay. There are no tardigrade examples in this book, so half a star.
It's a failing, yeah.
Half a star off. And then sort of going into the idea of, I mean, this chapter sort of just talks about the idea of like, wow, animals, look at all these consequences. Look at this consequence and that consequence from primordial times to the present.
Expected that she was a biologist or a chemist or something, not a mechanical engineer as her undergrad.
Oh, yeah?
Well, just because there's like, I don't know, an ethnologist or I don't know exactly what it would be, but she knows a lot about a lot.
She knows way more than I have ever imagined knowing. And even like this first like 3 chapters, I'm like, ooh. And then when you went and looked at that like reference section, I was like, there's half the book right there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There are so many studies that we have talked about on the show referenced in this book, too, which was cool.
And it does, I'm assuming it was to be more readable. It does not spend a lot of time saying, here's a study, here's a citation you should read. It's sort of like, you know, my friend or this, you know, this scientist did a study with dolphins, or this scientist did a study with butterflies, or salt organ producing fruit fly, right? They just sort of
like one sentence.
Here you go. Yeah.
And then it will have a little footnote. So you could go off on a whole tangent reading about all of the things that she's referencing, but she just references them like so quickly.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like you could, especially chapter 1, you could sum it up as selectionism is an essential idea to what consequences are, even though they don't necessarily on the surface relate. They really are why selectionism matters, which is like evolutionary selection is essential to behavior.
For sure. And, you know, we're familiar with the 3 levels of selection in that sense, but other people reading this book might not be. And she doesn't talk about it in that way, but that is how it's structured.
Yeah. Yeah. Between the anthropology, biology, evolutionary references, it's all referencing basically that.
Yeah. I did like in the first chapter sort of the idea of sort of what are some contexts related to consequences that all organisms seem to respond to, and the idea of variety as a consequence, having choice or control as a consequence. So really thinking of sort of those higher order pieces, because I think when we talk about consequences, or I mean most people, I mean working in education, when most people think of consequence, they're either saying a punishment in the kind of the old sense of the word, or B, oh, well, I'm giving them paying attention, or giving them a candy, or yelling at it, or giving them a toy. That kind of ABC part of the consequence, not really thinking more about consequence as the environment shifts in the environment, what kind of components of the environment, how do you change quality?
Consequences, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but consequences are happening all the time, whether they're programmed or not.
Exactly. But that's kind of the first chapter, really just throwing out the idea of, hey, these things are everywhere and all organisms respond. And here's some of the factors that play into consequences being appetitive or not. And then moving into evolution, moving to the next chapter. Anything that we missed on chapter 1? I mean, again, this is not a book that we're going to be able to sort of like, and then some of the big thesis here, because it just moves. Here's a lot of examples around a theme.
Other than there being no tardigrades, no.
No. Okay.
No, I have to say there's a gene called Klingon, because scientists have humor, that I thought was worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Was that in chapter 1, the Klingon gene?
I think so.
Okay. I didn't write that one. Didn't make it in my notes.
You probably chuckled but didn't write it down.
I don't even remember.
She's
I might not
funny,
have picked it up.
Right? We didn't say that yet. She's really funny. And she talks in the beginning of this book about how one should vary their writing style, right? To keep everyone's interest. And she like kind of explains how to do that. And then she just demonstrates it throughout the whole book by doing exactly that. Yeah.
All right. Moving into chapter 2 in the first part, Consequences and Evolution, the cause that works backward, which sounds like a terrible 50s sci-fi film. and this I really did like, because there's so much nature nurture conversation that I think when an average person who sort of doesn't study behavior or study anthropology or study biology, it becomes one of those, well, it's in us and that's what you're going to do, right? And it just feels like that, like that's very almost hardwired in our conversation about nature nurture. And I really like these next chapters in terms of looking at, well, yes, that's kind of true, but it's also not true. And it's a little more complex. But let me lay it out for you in ways that are good, fun examples that explain how it does work, but also works in different ways. So, in terms of things like, and here's an example, duck mother imprinting calls, a lot of birds in this first section. And the idea of, well, even though nature would say that birds are born with the ability to imprint to their mother, it actually is related to the consequences of what sounds they heard ahead of time. And we can change how they imprint or don't imprint based on what sound, what bird call they heard. So there's got to be a nature piece there, but there's also got to be a nurture piece, because we can affect it as outsiders or as people changing the environment. So again, lots of examples like that. Different bird songs, butterflies. So again, butterflies prefer yellow at birth, but they can learn through consequences to find nectar based on the color of a flower that's not necessarily yellow. So again, there's that nature nurture pull.
I really appreciated the birds section here, because I recently got into being a birder during the pandemic, and I bought a bird book, and I was practicing bird calls and trying to identify the annoying bird that was waking me up in the middle of the night. It was a robin, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And I just appreciated how, she brought it back to something that we might all kind of know about. Right? Mm-hmm. These examples, she set the stage, told us about the birds, and then we all kind of know about birds and bird songs, and, the female and the male do different things for different consequences. And I just really love how she set it up, and it felt really relatable.
Mm.
I felt like she was giving us examples that were of high interest to her.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So maybe we should be best friends.
Maybe, yeah. But not more best friends than you and me, though.
No, absolutely not. No, 100%.
Oh, okay. Good, just checking.
That one's genetic. That's not a consequence.
But like I was saying, I feel like not many people could have written this book, right? And I'm coming away from it thinking that, just because I feel like I know a lot about her through this book by the examples that she has chosen to provide to us. And I don't know, she just seems really unapologetically herself throughout this book, which I just really loved.
Awesome.
I think when in this chapter we start talking about evolution and selection pressures, is that something that everyone here had already thought about in terms of kind of consequences? Because I reading this, it was like, yes, this is how I think of evolution. Selection pressures, it must have to do with consequences. Though I don't know if I ever verbalized it or vocalized it as, it's another type of consequence, so much as just sort of what I learned in science class of evolution selects based on who can survive. But I never really put it together as yes, and that survival is a consequence in terms of who can access more of a resource, who can breed more. So I sort of never thought about it in terms of consequences that's the science I do, versus just a separate biology thing that I happened to know. Did anyone else feel that way, or that just me?
That's you.
No.
That's just me.
Because, that's what we teach, is these levels of selection. So there's selection by phylogeny, which is based on genetics, and then there's selection of ontogeny, which is based on behavior of the individual, and then there's selection at the cultural level. So to me, they're all tied together. But I think that the the idea that gets misplaced here is that there is something that an animal or a species is evolving toward, right? As though there is some ideal version of that species, and when the species gets to that version, then they're going to stay there, right? Mm-hmm. But there's no forward planning in evolution. It's just the current genes that are presented and what is selected for best through evolution based on what is currently available. And then random mutations could occur that end up being more advantageous, and then those genes get selected for. But it's not, there's no like pre-planned system going on here, right? Which I think can get tangled up in the idea of evolution. It's just like whatever is out there, the best version is going to get picked if it's important.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's also how people see when they talk about reinforcement too, right? Where, reinforcement, when we provide reinforcement, we're reinforcing the selected past, right? We don't know if this point it will then increase the future likelihood of the behavior because it's not the behavior yet, right? It hasn't happened. The future hasn't happened yet. Yes. So like this consequences, I don't know who told me this once, but I think I used to think like you, Rob, until someone said this, like, we're only selecting based on the past. And I was like, oh, maybe that was like a few years ago when I was probably teaching it incorrectly. But I felt that I see parallels with how we feel with consequences versus how we think with like reinforcement and punishment, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Robbie, you really should read Evolution and Contextual Behavior Science, because I think it's a good book that'll help you have a different mindset about that. Just help you in general, definitely. But just given the things you're interested in, I think that would help. But no, I just referring back to the book here, I think what I really enjoy about this chapter 2 is she hints at some ethology and some information science of like the signals, and that's something else that we don't appreciate in our field enough in the skill acquisition of becoming a behavior analyst, that like know that part of our mammalian brain involves a lot of signal processing for both biological reasons, and then we can abstract that away and talk about information science. But like there's a pretty good section about like signals that she tops off the chapter, and it's really, really, I think, interesting and a good couple pages.
All right. And did you know that there is apparently a theory that the Cambrian explosion, in which there was just this huge variety of creatures evolving, potentially may have occurred due to the evolution of the learning through consequences itself? That kind of blew my mind that was even a thought of like, wait, consequences was an evolutionary step, or learning from consequences was an evolutionary step. Wow. But that makes sense in terms of, well, creatures had to evolve to have enough of a neural pathway to be able to process information and then show signs of learning through stimulation around them. But that was pretty neat.
Yeah.
Pretty neat.
Like our kids have these little things called hex bugs. Do you guys know what those are? Mm-hmm. Yes. Alan looks sad.
No, I just was saying,
they're like little robot things that are shaped like bugs, right? And they are a robot. But they're just powered by a battery, right? So the battery just makes them like buzz around, and so if they just buzz around, and if they hit into something, then they will respond, and they'll like just kick themselves back basically and like go in a new direction. But so my kids like put them in these mazes that they make and try to get them through the maze, but it's frustrating because there's no learning that occurs with these little guys, right? So they can't see what they're doing, and they will just keep bumping in and bumping in and bumping into the same spot, or like go through the pathway and then turn themselves around and go back out of the maze the wrong direction, etc. And I know, like, it's just interesting to look at them and think like there is so much that goes into even like the tiniest little organisms that can respond to stimuli around them. It involves discrimination and it involves learning. which you don't necessarily think about until you watch something like this, which clearly has none of those components, and see like how ineffective it is at behaving.
Mm-hmm.
See, I brought it around.
Just responds. You either create the maze that can move through or you don't. Ooh. All right. So moving on to the next chapter on genes and consequences. And again, I think we kind of talked in the intro section about this first section kind of having the most either novel or at least not recently reviewed information. But talking about genes, again, I think it took a lot of information that I knew about genes, about the genome, about chromosomes, and combined it with what I know about human behavior. And I realized that these things can go together in a way that I probably, none of it felt like, yes, I've never heard anything close to this before. But I don't think I've seen it sort of laid out this way. Just this idea that our genes aren't that dissimilar than any other organism, and how our proteins are expressed through our genes and our gene codes. Certainly that is something that will just happen from a biological standpoint, but how so much of the environment and the consequences of the environment will determine which of our genes get expressed, how they get expressed, whether they get fully expressed or differently expressed, and how just that level of variety or selection at that level will impact development over time for certain organisms like the fruit fly, but even for us will impact sort of, different components of our own development cycle and our own, our own development.
One thing I love is the opening. It says we share half of our genes with the banana. That made me giggle. And then I thought that the subtitles in this chapter were on point. Meet your genome, getting turned on. Like, those were funny.
She's really funny.
I know one example was, they had a bunch of gene examples. There was no Klingon gene, I don't think, in this chapter.
No, I was wrong. It was in this.
It was in this. Oh, was it in this chapter? Okay. I remember. I know that the one I wrote that was interesting was the CFOS gene, where you'd have two rats, and they do an obstacle course, and one would just learn to do an obstacle course through operant conditioning. They get a reward for moving through some sort of chaining process, and then one just sort of would run around for the same amount of time as the first rat, just sort of running around with no learning. There was no learning. They just ran around, and then at some point they stopped running around. And this gene
control group,
through that they could observe the maze.
Yes,
right,
yeah, and there was a control group. That, don't forget that.
Oh yes. And when learning from consequences occurred, this gene, the CFOS gene, would be turned on. But when there was no learning involved, even though it was the same amount of sort of same topographical movement and access, that gene wasn't expressed. Which that part kind of blew my mind. The idea of just something as simple as like running through a maze or not running through a maze with the same consequences at play would impact gene expression. But wow, when you think about it that way, yeah, I guess consequences sure are important. And then I stopped reading because I learned my lesson. They're important.
It hits all those 3 levels of selection, right? So it's just a really nice demonstration, these early chapters, of how the interplay across 3 levels really affects behavior at all levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, but it's also, it has to happen. Like, there has to be a biological mechanism for why consequation works across. And it's one of those, this is apparently how it does, at least in the motor cortex. It has to do with gene expression. Mm-hmm. So it's also it has to be that way. Like, for selectionism and evolution and us as biological creatures to be affected by consequation, there has to be a biological component. It's not magic. And so she gives us a little peek into the window of that.
Right. We have to be sensitive to contingency.
Yeah. Right. All the way down to our genome.
Yeah.
So
fascinating.
Do you think there's a reason that she went from gene, and then I don't want to jump ahead if people want to talk more about genes, but I thought the chapter 4 on neuroscience and consequences, that while in some ways, I guess it kind of brought it all home, though when you think about it, as important as our brains are, the idea of evolution and genes feel like more important than, because we can't have genes, we can't have brains without genes, we can't have genes without evolution. But I guess we started big and we get more specific.
Right, but I was like, but I think it does make sense because, I mean, for our current concept of what learning is, and like gene expression in the like brain and nervous system affects us as individuals and us as practitioners, because we help people often who have differences in the way that their genes are expressed through their nervous and neurological systems. So,
I mean, how did folks feel about this chapter specifically? Because I know we've talked in the past about, people love hearing explanations based on, well, your brain and your brain pathways. And I think most people can name like one or two parts of the brain. And those are the ones that get brought up all the time. And I personally get a little tired of the oversimplicity of how brains work to describe everything. I think it lends itself to either too much mentalism or to blaming brain organs for behavior in ways that, while I feel the goal is to take the blame off of an individual for being like good or bad, also misses the other point of, well, if you put it in the brain, where's the teaching going to come out? Then it just feels like it's hopeless. It's in their brain. What could you do? I don't think this chapter did that at all, but sort of what were your general thoughts about your feelings about neuroscience, your feelings about describing behavior through brain pathways, and your backgrounds and your own learning history about behavior? Like how did this chapter come off for all of you?
I can tell you that I did a little digging because I was looking at this and I said, oh, I wonder if this was the time when the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior started to publish neuroscientific studies, and it was. So this is like when this book was written, like probably a few years earlier than when this book was published. This was the time when you started to see studies in the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior looking at fMRIs, looking at brain waves and how and when consequences are applied, how that changes the brain and the neural pathways. So it makes So it makes sense that this chapter would lead after the gene chapter, because this was relevant at the time that the book was written, and this was something that people were talking about in the field, albeit maybe not applied researchers, but definitely basic researchers and basic. I guess there's no basic clinicians, but basic researchers and those translational researchers were talking about this at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think she also just really highlights why neuroscience is where the science of consequences plays out the most, because this is where she highlights like the use of methylphenidate, and she comes back to the CFOS, and she's just talking really about like stuff that happens with consequences really tends to happen in the brain or be very important in the brain. And here's all these reasons why that really all of us, I mean, people might not be familiar with CFOS, but they can get the basic premise, and then people know about ADHD or have a sense of that, like a stimulant affects behavior. So I think it's a very reasonable sort of jump that she's making to be like, and this is the next most important sort of area to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot forget the cutest mouse on page 62. It's the cutest little mouse picture I've ever seen. Yeah. I'm reading along, and I literally turn the page and I go, oh. So,
there's little cartoon drawings in this book.
I know usually when I read these books, you get like tables, or you have graphs, or you have maybe more kind of scientifically labeled pictures. But no, it's just kind of pictures of there's a dolphin and someone waving at the dolphin.
Illustrations by Renee Reyes.
I just
looked it up.
Okay. But they're just pictures.
Like, did she also draw the pictures herself?
I was thinking that too, and I was if she did, I want this, and I would make it as a t-shirt.
Well, either way, it's adorable.
Page 62, adorable little animal eating what looks to be Cheerios. It's probably not, but so everyone can see it. And I would make this into a t-shirt.
We always talk about like the circuitous, nature of reinforcement, right? So you provide reinforcement and increases behavior. Why did it increase behavior? Because it was a reinforcer. So we do run into the danger of defining a behavior through its process and utilizing that same definition. To me, having a window into what's happening in the brain helps us avoid that type of circuitous definition, right? Because for different folks, things may operate as better reinforcers or lesser reinforcer, or coming in with a stronger EO to potentially act as a reinforcer, right? And the reasoning for that is going to be related to genetic differences and neurotransmitter differences in the brain. And the effects of different reinforcers, it could be different across individuals due to the way in which those consequences produce different neurotransmitters in the brain. So to me, I don't have an issue with this. If Skinner were here today, he wouldn't say don't look inside the brain. He just said before we didn't have the technology to do so. But consequences are operating at whatever level, whether they're visible to us overtly or covertly, right? And the same is true for stimuli that are inside and outside of the skin, and behavior that's occurring inside and outside of the skin as well. So it's an artificial barrier.
On page 71, it's like the last paragraph. I know you love that, Rob, when they take it home. And she's like, B.F. Skinner and others noted long ago that neuroscientists studying behavior would not get far without partnering with experts who understand fundamental behavior principles.
Mm-hmm.
The science of consequence will be enhanced by the new neuroscience discoveries, but the principles of consequence hold just as they always have. I love that.
Well, this is the kind of neuroscience and discussion of neurobehavior that I like, where there is a through line of here's how the brain works and it leads to behavior, and here's how behavior impacts the brain. And there's just sort of that back and forth. What I find frustrating is, like you said, Diana, when we sort of are just like, this is too complicated, let's just ignore the brain, which is no good. Or the flip side of, who cares about behavior?
Hard.
The brain is firing. Therefore, we do these things because of brain. That's sort of where I don't like either one of those options. And I did find this chapter really, really fascinating in terms of the combination of both. And we've talked about we've talked about Sidman working with neuroscientists back in the day. So this isn't new to the field, but it does feel like one of those areas where I guess 2012 is when we started kind of getting back into building those relationships and building that collaboration more, at least publicly.
And if I had to, sort of as we've talked, I've realized why I think her writing about neuroscience is more enjoyable and less frustrating than some of what you mentioned, Rob, is she does a very good job of just sticking to correlation. She never says, and this causes this 100% of the time, which was that feels very comfortable to us as behavior scientists, behavior analysts, because we know that's correlation is the best we get.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she does a lot of, this is interesting, and here's a correlation with a strong implication. And then if we go up the ladder a little bit, here's another correlation that's really, really important. Don't forget this. So I think that's another strength of her writing, especially in this section. She's just giving you really good correlational information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So that gets into consequences on the scale of the developing organism. Let's move on to part 2, called There's a Science of Consequences? ? Which is an odd title for part 2, because I've already read a third of your book, Dr. Schneider. I'm pretty sure I figured that was part of it, right? And this is sort of the behavior analysis light section of the book. So I don't know if we want to go through. I mean, we'll say a chapter and kind of name some things that we liked about it, but we probably don't need to go into as much depth. But this might be a great time for folks, because there are so many anecdotes, experiments, for us to name a couple, like either per chapter, per section, or a few total that we really enjoyed, that we thought captured the idea of, I want to explain how consequences work to someone who's not in this field, which of these examples or which of these do I think would have done the best job if I had to pull one out and say, I read recently, and I think this captures the idea. So chapter 5 talks about schedules, consequences on schedule. Simple principles with surprising outcomes. I know one thing I was shocked at is I really expected this to be, there are many types of schedules. Here are some examples. And then maybe at some point have a table with like, all right, we're going to talk about mixed schedules and contiguous schedule. And nope, not. It's just sort of at some point, they're like, by the way, a bunch of schedules. Here they are. I didn't even name them. They just all kind of do different things.
Yeah.
I love in the very first page, she hints at the fact that none of us, no matter how strongly you might think you understand the principle of consequences, you can be affected by your behavior can be affected by consequences and you not realize it. And I think that is a fact about consequences that is taken for granted, that not even taken for granted, that is ignored by so many in our field and in related fields, where like, what matters is, does the behavior change in relation to the consequences? Not, is the person aware of the consequence? It's like, well, that's not the principle that we're using. We're just like, we know that applying consequences can change behavior. And if we do it in an ethical, responsible way, we can get socially acceptable outcomes. And she basically lays that out on the first page in a very subtle way. And I appreciate that.
I also appreciate how she combines some of the schedules that animals will adhere to, and then how that might be changed when there's like the idea of language that comes in. I think that sometimes is forgotten when people talk about schedules, that we're always going to follow like the FR schedule. We're always going to follow the VI schedule, right? But then with language comes in rule governed behavior, and it makes it a little more wonky, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I'd sort of like the arbitrary nature of some of the rules that are created. I don't think it was this chapter. I'm trying to find it in my notes which chapter it was, but the idea of someone in the study, it was one of those sort of like, you're gonna earn tokens, or you're gonna earn something by like pressing the button or doing some sort of arbitrary task. And how even though the point of the study was to sort of look at like matching law or something, this guy just made up a rule about, I think the point of the study is you're going to see, will I do this horrible task for longer than anyone? So the consequence I'm getting out of this is I think I'm going to show everyone that I'm the best participant that you have. And this guy's just like blowing the scientist. He's not actually getting anything fun from it. Yeah, it's a persistent
That's way later.
study.
That's in like chapter 12 or something.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a little similar to the beginning, but that idea too of just because we have, like you were saying, Jack, just we have schedules of reinforcement doesn't mean people don't just respond in different ways. And why would that be? And then we get a little bit into why, how we can only pay attention to so many things.
I think that's why Alan is saying that he'd love to see an update here that really brings in like a larger contextual perspective, because that's absolutely what she's getting at here, is that our behavior is not just easily going to adhere to a simple schedule of reinforcement, because there are no simple schedules of reinforcement in place. We're all responding to multiple schedules at any given time in the context of larger conditional discriminations and rule-governed behavior, et cetera. So it's, the way behavior operates is simple on its face, but we're never operating in a pristine clinical environment.
The one little tidbit that I loved in this chapter was when she was talking about, okay, if you figured out, like how so many people don't know that schedules are existing, but if you can figure it out, then you can more intelligently enjoy the reinforcer in exchange for less effort. And then she's like, but oddly, the feeling of victory afterwards is often fleeting, followed by a letdown and a pause. I just like that. And I have felt that. I have been there, Susan. That has been my life.
Well, like they say, Jackie, on page 83, wisdom is knowing when the consequence is worth the effort.
Right? I know. It's just like, I liked that too, because then it was like, it doesn't mean the consequence wasn't effective. It just, that's the schedule, right, that you're on. So there's that post-reinforcement pause there. But I like how she brings that like real worth in. And that's my favorite in chapter 5.
Moving on, chapter 6, the dark side of consequences.
I hope that these were all like shower thoughts, right? Or like long walk thoughts. Like, I hope that she wrote the book and then she was like, no, I'm going to rename these chapters and subtitles because they're like on point. If she just wrote them down first time, I'm a little mad at her because it seems like they're too good. So I'm hoping that's something we can ask her, is if she had to revise the subtitles a ton.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this book reflects a lifetime of thinking and observation.
Yeah, you're
You
right.
can't just sit down and write this thing.
Yeah. And I thought this chapter, at least from the beginning, was really just going to be about sort of like it's like a coercion and its fallout light. And parts of it were, but that wasn't exactly the point. It almost took a 50,000 foot view of the dark side of consequences, not as if they were necessarily evil or bad or wrong, but that they exist. And they can lead to behavior just like any other consequence. And whether that is good or bad is related to the context in which it happens, not that the fact that it happens.
Yeah, and this chapter also, I was pulling it back. In 2015, there was an article by Barron and Galizio, I think, that was published in the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior. And it was about, like, is negative reinforcement necessarily bad, or is... that was like the whole chapter, and how talking about negative reinforcements everywhere, and people usually assume it's like a bad thing, but if we can learn to work around it. So then when I read this chapter, I was like, oh, you read Barron and Galizio, I bet, because it had a very similar ring, or maybe that's what people were talking about at that time. But it was like this chapter, that article were like on a straight path, which is cool. I don't think she mentioned it, but maybe she did.
Well, if it was 2015, it would have been after.
Oh, yeah, right.
But maybe there was a predecessor article that...
Yeah, maybe.
And I also think she hints at in this chapter, and again, I think this goes back to my wish for functional contextualism, that verbal behavior about consequences can change our responsiveness to those reinforcers in a really dark way. So it's just like, oh, Rob, like every time I see Rob, he's always so friendly, and he gives me like a piece of candy out of his pocket because he's so friendly. But then if I were to find out that it's because he's trying to affect my pathway on the way to work through behavioral modification, I'm probably be like, screw Rob. I don't want his stupid candy anymore, because it's and the only difference is that I now have like additional information. I have verbal behavior to apply, and it changes the context. And she hints at that in that sometimes something that seems good, you can get, like, gossip can turn a friend into an enemy and things like that. And I think that that's, again, something that we do not consider often enough in our field. And she does a good job at sprinkling that kind of information in.
Yeah. And in one of these chapters, she quotes Hamlet and saying there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so as well.
It's this chapter.
It is this one.
That's a Shakespeare quote.
I'm on point.
Just telling you. Just want to sound smart,
Thanks.
Well, you don't. I mean, sorry, never mind.
The Bard, you might have heard.
Good God. I have to go.
Yeah, negative reinforcement. Speaking of, I'm going to log out. Bye.
Oh, wait, that can't be the best example of negative reinforcement. What did you all think about the owner who put a bunch of mouse traps on his couch so that his dog would not sit on the couch? And what happened is the dog learned, if I put a blanket on the couch, I can set off all the traps and then sleep on the couch anyway.
That's amazing.
If you can teach your dog how to, like, rearrange furniture, I mean, negative reinforcement can't be all bad.
It's a smart dog.
I love
don't
that.
I'm like,
My
how
dog
did
would-
dog-
Terrible.
How'd the dog figure that one
I can't
out?
believe the owner would have done that. That's horrible.
It seems like a lot of work for a very small problem.
People do that. People will do that if they don't want their dog to get on the countertop. They'll line them with mouse traps or with tin foil, with cats too, and it's supposed to scare them off. I just think that my dogs, if they get scared, they're never coming into that room again. So I'm like, you'll just be somewhere else. You won't be in the house anymore.
With tinfoil, they just don't like the sound.
Yeah, or I don't know. I don't have cats, so.
It's reflective, maybe?
I don't know. I haven't done it because my dogs don't get on the counter.
Well, your dogs are big.
I know. They could just go like this.
Are you standing up?
Reach up? Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Chapter 7.
Chapter 7, Choices and signals.
I'm impressed that she brought in the matching law here and did it in a way that I understood. So when we go into the matching law, like we should just reread this little section because I find the matching law sometimes easy, and then I read it again and I'm like, what? And I get confused when they like pull out all of the big equations and when they talk about, K, and I get nervous. But this was a beautiful summation of the matching law. So if you have like supervisees and you have this book, like print this off. It's nice.
I actually read it and then at the end was like, are we talking about the matching law? And I had to go back up.
I think she does. She names matching law. She says matching law at some point.
So what can matching law do?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was smooth. It was so smooth.
I liked her example of the matching law as when you're watching TV, and her example is there's two shows, a baseball game and a nature documentary, and you're going to switch between the two based on what's happening in each. So it's like, oh, they're changing pitchers, they're warming up. I'm going to watch the nature documentary. Oh, it's an ad. I'm going to go back to the baseball game. Oh, look, they're doing something exciting. And I think that's my favorite matching law example of switching between channels, which now you can't do because now you have to switch between streaming services. That takes too long. The response effort's too high. So you're just going to sit there and watch whatever slop is on.
Well, you could watch one on your phone and one on the big TV.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's the new matching law example on my phone and the TV.
Or you switch between Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and TikTok. If the,
there we go.
There you go.
Stops being so good, you just switch between apps.
My algorithm right now is I don't know where it came from. It's hilarious.
Mine's crap. Yes.
Yeah, mine's like homesteaders. Which, I mean, cool. Gardeners, which I don't have a garden. It's just a very interesting.
Yeah, but maybe it's because it's novel stimuli that's enriching for you.
It's not. I'm turning it off. I'm like, okay.
I don't trust the algorithm to think about behavior that way so much as like what do they?
The only
push
thing that
the
they
most?
have right is puppies.
What lever are we pushing the most? And that's what we're gonna give you.
It makes it so you can't like hate watch anything because then it thinks you like it.
Yeah, that's true.
Speaking of hate watching things, various signals. That's also in this chapter. Discussions of whether humans like things that are signaled or not. I like that. I did appreciate sort of the discussion of signals and the idea of how that impacts our choice. The example of rats who will actually choose signaled mild shocks over unsignaled, less intense mild shocks because there's a sense of that control. Or that's one reason. I mean, that's one possible reason. That's not necessarily
right.
And how that can, what signals we have. Signals for humans, signals of completion can be important. The example of, and I love this because I always wonder this myself. So I appreciated that it was in this book. The idea of, do people give more money when they see our church needs a new roof thermometer or our school needs new playground equipment thermometer, and it's clearly like $100 and their goal is 10,000. Do people give more money because they feel bad? Like that's terrible. Or do they give more money when it was at 0? And then the next day they come by and it's at like 7,000. Is that when they give? And it does seem like research would tell us it's probably more of no, people want to give money when it's gone from nothing to something high and it's getting closer to the goal. Like that is more of the signal. You attend to that more and that might change your behavior to donate versus look how pathetic that drive is going. Let's just keep on going. Let's not give them any money. They'll never make it. So those are the kinds of signals I'm most interested in. And I'm glad they were examples in this chapter. Any other signals or anecdotes or choices that you noted?
I did like they said, like with the matching law too, is like dieters will avoid commercials that talk about rich foods, right? And smokers will steer clear of the smoking hangouts, and they'll allocate their responding to other places because of the negative connotation, right? That they're not going to receive reinforcement in those areas. So I liked that. I liked those examples.
Well, I think the smoker example, Jay, that goes into kind of the next chapter as well.
Well, you know what? The smoker example was the last paragraph, bringing it into chapter 8.
What? I did not recognize that. That's great. Well, let's go to chapter 8, Pavlov and Consequences, an essential partnership. So this chapter is all about classical conditioning, which I appreciate a review of classical conditioning every now and again, because she mentions in the book that sometimes it can be hard to discriminate. Is this classical conditioning or is this operant conditioning? Because they sort of all go hand in hand. It's sort of like we were talking about with like, well, is this the brain causing this behavior or is it the consequences? Well, it's kind of a little bit of everything. It's a melange, if you will. And when we talk about classical conditioning, certainly we're talking about the response of kind of reflexes, so unlearned behavior being cued by some stimulus in the environment. But how even in that context, it's not so simple. It's like, well, it's the knee-jerk reaction, and that's it. That's all we have. Because something like emotional behavior, while that would fall under classical conditioning, it also can come under operant control as well, based on signals. So it's all kind of a mix mashup, which was really fun to read about. I don't know how much someone who doesn't know the differences or think about the differences would have cared as much, or whether they would have just focused on some of the examples.
Right, because it's not as simplistic as operant behavior is learned, right? And everything else is reflexive behavior, because learned behavior can be operant or responsive. But with operant behavior, we're going to see changes in behavior based on contingencies that are provided. And with respondent behavior, it is largely going to be elicited by the stimulus once that relation is established. Mm-hmm. So that sometimes I think can get oversimplified in people's minds. I don't know if that was your question that you asked. This was the chapter that had that super sad example about the dad ODing, right? Because he got the opioid medicine in a different location.
Yes.
Right.
Which is kind of one of those sad, that folks in recovery can get told, like, listen, you haven't been on drugs in a while. If you take them in a new place, you're very likely to OD because you're taking more than your body can handle here. Whereas if you were home, it could take that, because you've
setting.
That setting. I think one of the examples I liked was looking at the placebo effect as kind of respondent behavior, in that your brain, here, you're going to get this medicine. It's going to make you feel better. Yes, in some ways that is respondent because your brain just fires in pain centers the same way, whether you're told you're going to have something. But it can't just be a reflex, because a lot of that also is based on the history you have with doctors giving you something and saying, take this and you'll feel better, and it having some sort of an active ingredient that leads to your feeling better. So it's sort of a little bit of everything needs to be a part of that placebo effect. It's not just one or the other. And I don't know, when you start trying to break that, then I feel like I try to play the game of like, yeah, but which one is this? Which one is here? And then it just, is that just one of those questions of like, don't bother. It's not worth, just appreciate it's all there.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I am like that too, Rob. In all of the examples, I try to like tease it apart and say, okay, like what part of this is respondent? What part of this is operant? But I think most of it's operant. We can say that, right? Most of it's operant, but the internal bodily sensations usually are more reflexive. But it's still hard. It's still too hard, right? It's still too hard to like tease them apart. So I don't think you need to.
No, and I think that they give the example of the rats who are allergic to egg whites that's paired with flashing lights, and then the flashing lights induce a similar immune response. And that people, I think some people would be like, oh, well, that's like classical conditioning. I'm like, well, no, that seems related to like a stress response based on learned history.
Right.
Like, right. So like, I think that's probably stress, and a strong enough stress but yeah, so it's really hard to like, those are good examples of, those are verbal models we have for types of conditioning that maybe in application are important to remember, but might not always be clear cut.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think when we talk about the differences, I feel like when it was first introduced to me back in, like early psychology classes, it was sort of to try to teach the idea of like, well, one is sort of about like learning, and one is sort of just like, I don't know, it just happens. They're paired together. There's nothing you can do about it, which is not really true. I mean, it's slightly true, but it's not really true, nor is it really relevant as to why would you discriminate between the two types of conditioning. Clearly, this, both of them will happen, whether you're planning for them or not. So it's more about just sort of having an understanding of the development of these contingencies, but who cares to some extent when it comes down to how is this impacting and helping people?
I feel like in this section, if she had talked about salience, which is something we don't talk about a lot in our field, like it's in there, it's in the Cooper. I just was reviewing it, but they basically say salience is determined by the organism. So it's kind of hard to know what's going to be salient until the organism has responded to the environment. I feel like this would have been a good section for that, because I feel like that's what is a salient signal. This would have squared right into this area in terms of just like wishing, if I wanted to use this to teach more advanced students something, man, this would have been a great chapter to like have had someone give an external perspective on that for.
Mm-hmm.
True. And then she does go on to talk about like differential observing response and things like that, which I think can or should be tied into salience. But
Right. Yeah, she
point.
talks about that a lot in chapter 9, which we could move into.
Yeah.
But I would just want to say that I think that this distinction here is really important, Rob, because, as behavior analysts, we are often asked to come in and work on behavior that can be very big, very explosive. But there are times in which that behavior is largely going to be categorized as emotional responding and may not be as sensitive to contingencies or consequences as we've been taught. So, learning what the distinction is there and thinking about the complexities that we can see in responding is important, because there may be times when this chapter starts with her saying, I spent some time in Fiji. And then when Fiji came on in the Olympics, right, when the Fiji flag came by, I was overcome with emotion and I stood up and yelled, Fiji! Which is so cute and endearing, right? But, she was overwhelmed by, that surge of, I don't know what it is inside your body, right? Like that feeling that you get when you're just like overwhelmed with emotion. That's a respondent response, right? To hearing Fiji, like that was her response. And so sometimes when our clients are responding, it is that type of response, right? And it may or may not be wholly behavior that can be modified via consequences. So thinking about the larger, once again, contextual situation in which responding is occurring and the stimuli that are present there is an important picture in properly planning for behavior intervention.
All right. Well, let's start wrapping this part up with chapter 9, observing and attending.
This one was my favorite chapter.
I know it would be, Jack. You love observing. Always observing. What did you? What? How did it do? How did it do in terms of someone who is a pro observer?
It did great, actually.
Both in your personal and professional life.
I feel sad that I did not get to read this article or this chapter while I was writing my dissertation, because I think it would have been really helpful in the beginning to kind of give me an overarching view, because I thought this was more cohesive than many of the other articles that I read. When I'm talking about imitation and observational learning and the idea of the mirror neurons, I thought this was so helpful. So I loved it. It was my favorite chapter of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I was surprised.
And that makes sense because your dissertation is on observational learning.
Right. Yeah.
for the audience. Yeah.
Yeah. And the pictures in this one were great too. I'm just saying. The pictures in this one. Again, I'm in love with these cute pictures.
When she talks about imitation and whether animals imitate, maybe some animals can imitate, but most of what animals do that looks like imitation is not imitation. I didn't quite understand the distinction between imitation and, well, that animal is copying that animal, but it's not imitation because it's biological instinct. I wasn't quite sure I understood the difference between them.
Well, I think they're talking more about there's the instinctual behavior that will persist even when it's not reinforced, right? So like the instance of there's like a pig and the pig will root, and that's like it's not a learned response, it's an instinctual reflexive response so the animal can get food, right? And even if someone reinforces something that behavior that might be in contrast to that, so you can't do both at the same time, the animal will always go back to that instinctual response. So that's what I think she's saying, that even though they're doing the same response, it's not necessarily imitation because the reinforcer is the behavior itself and not the act that it looks similar to someone else.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Just because two organisms are behaving in a similar way in temporal contiguity to one another does not automatically mean that it is imitation. So an imitative response must be controlled by the model that precedes it.
Right.
So the examples of, the birds learning how to open the shorebirds opening oysters would not be imitation.
Right.
Because they would naturally like stick their beaks into things.
Yeah,
but they might learn from their parent, but they're not learning to follow the parent.
Behavior and not because of the model.
Okay. So there's learning there, but it's not imitation.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. That was hard for me too, by the way. That took me like 3 years to get. So,
when you explained it, it made more sense. It didn't quite. It sort of just is a one-off line of like, a lot of these things aren't imitation. Anyway, but I just talked about animals observing and learning through observation.
That too, yeah.
And I was like, wait, what? Why is this not the same thing? They're like, I don't know. Birds going down when they're flying. That's not imitation. Birds go down when they fly all the time.
Hilariously, I went down a huge rabbit hole for like 2 weeks where I only looked at birds. Do you remember this, Diana? And I was like, I'm going to include this. And I had like 50 or 60 articles of like birds and porcupines and raccoons and doing all these instinctual behaviors. And then my advisor was like, that's not even imitation. And I was like, great. I'm glad that I could write this whole other paper now.
That's part of writing a dissertation, is that you accidentally write or research a whole other paper.
Yeah, so that happened. So that's the only reason I know about it, Rob, is because I like went into it big time. Like,
well, it was worth it because you taught me the difference. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right, the final chapter in this section, Thinking and Communicating, chapter 10.
And this, again,
this section really did build nicely on itself over and over. This one really hit home with some of the animal studies. I think I kind of want to ask Dr. Schneider, does she have pets? Lots of pets? Did she enjoy, is she a birder? Does she enjoy watching animals?
Definitely a birder.
Because the idea of like dogs can respond to 1,000 words.
Not all dogs.
Not all dogs.
That dog.
That dog did.
That dog learned.
Well, if one dog could do it, potentially
one of my dogs.
Other dogs.
They need to be taught.
Yeah.
Well, I know they didn't just learn.
One of my dogs, I don't actually think would. Reinforcement is not silly enough for her, but one of them would definitely learn.
Not every dog. And then some of the varying types of monkeys can also have a vocab of that size. But then she was like, but they can only talk in 2 to 3 word sentences.
Yeah, she was like, way to go, humans. Yeah.
Like, no matter how much you train.
But here talking about language and how, for humans, how the social attention is such a key component, such a key consequence for why we continue to use language. The example of a boy raised by deaf parents who could sign perfectly fluently, but the parents just left the TV on so that the child learned spoken English, and because there were no consequences around listening to the TV. That was such a great
example.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And then it came back to meaningful differences.
Yep.
Right? Alan? Full circle for us.
Exactly. Yeah, that's...
That was Ellen's first book club.
Oh, a long time ago now.
A long time ago. And I just remember I found the 5 million word difference.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, we couldn't find it.
It's because it's basically the very last page of the book.
And then, talking about communication, how we learn to communicate our internal states through consequences, through both, visuals paired with internal states, metaphors, right? And then passing on consequences, now we can pass on consequences through rules. And here's my example. It's in my notes here. Here's my example of the guy who just refused to stop pressing the button I didn't write down what their activity was, but who just kept going because he thought the study was on how persistent he was as an individual, and he wanted to be seen as such. I wrote in my notes. But even here, some brain, a little bit of talk of brain about language, but not too much here. Just the idea that certainly our brains are involved in language. And that's part 2.
Good. Speaking of what we've been talking about, now I can't help but thinking, hey, boy, is Diana trying to tell me that we've come full circle, and so this is my last book club? Because
We're doing it on air.
Your own superstitious rule.
I love that. We're doing it on air. That's how we roll. Beforehand.
I was like, stone cold, Diana. Gosh.
You're not going to cut it out or anything.
No,
it's just all there.
I didn't mean it that way.
No.
That's funny.
Alan already knows what the next 2 books in the year are. So. All right. Well, that's behavior analysis light section. And I think even in that, there were a lot of great examples that.
Not that light.
No. Well, you're right. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Behavior analysis interpreted is how I would word it.
I love some of the. I want to keep some of these examples.
Good. I feel like students studying for the exam should read a chapter of Cooper and then read a chapter of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right? This could be their companion. What did that mean?
Yeah.
Or maybe use this to think of metaphors or kind of cue their own metaphors that they can develop. Is this is how you're going to talk about it with the family based on your own life experiences, not just from this book, not just from the technical jargon.
If I had to highlight a killer line, it's competing consequences vie for our private behaviors just as for our public ones. That I really like that line in this section.
Good one.
All right, now we bring it all together for part 3, Shaping Destinies. And speaking about shaping destinies, I read a blurb in my notes here. Was this section one in which you found, talking about attention and learned consequences, did you find yourself paying more or less attention to each of the chapters based on your own interests or based on possibly other consequences? For example, I counted when I read these books, I put sticky notes on the pages I want to come back to and either reread or sort of think about and then summarize or combine to put my notes together for the episode. And the animal chapter, I only had 5 sticky notes for the 12 pages. That's half a note per page. But the chapter on education, I had 17 sticky notes for the 18 pages. So I had 1 per page. I doubled my sticky note volume there. And some of that, when I thought about it, was what could be the consequences of play there? Was it that I more interested in talking about education, even though technically I would know more about education, I would know more about that chapter? Was I able to pay attention to the cues? Was it the learned consequence of, there's a chapter on animals. Well, I know Jackie's going to talk about that chapter, so I don't need to pay attention at all. She'll do all the talking.
Or is it you were approaching the end of the book, so your rate of responding increased?
I put that in my notes, too.
I did not know that.
Yes, so a lot of reasons there. But did anyone find themselves sort of changing their pattern of reading or thinking in these last sections when it was such a, here are real, we talk about real examples, but here's kind of the daily work that we often do, kind of put or our focused interests. Here it is.
I don't think I did, only because I didn't give myself enough space to finish the book in a way that I could do that. So I was reading this book this weekend as my child was sick. So I was okay, I have 2 days. I need to read these many chapters per day to finish the book. So I think if I had given myself a little more space to read the book, I might have done that, but I didn't.
And I think in not a bad way that I often tend to have, when it comes to making notes, an opposite response of I don't know as much about that. I want to go read more. Mark it. As opposed to, I remember that. That's comfortable. I don't need no notes.
Yeah.
So, because I'm always like, I don't understand, because I tend to have what's this biology stuff? I got to go back and read more, or I got to remember about that. So,
Diana, did you have a similar pattern? Or different? No, just you read a book and now you're here to talk about it.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm
she
trying
had a
to
me
think. There
pattern.
was one of these chapters that I was really into, and it was.
That's why you need to use sticky notes. So you can find it.
Right. I think the chapter on education.
That was my most interesting
Probably, yeah, because it was highly relevant.
I just really like the 161, the very first page of this, because it's like, what a better explanation for like ACT type approaches of avoiding the unpleasant is not a way to live joyfully. And
It's
very
true.
well. Yeah, it's very, very. So I just really like. I have this page like open, and like it's one I wanted to talk about because I just love.
I talk to my students about this very idea, and we talk about avoidance behavior, right? Experiential avoidance. We talk about it in terms of self-care, and I think it's useful for them, although it's not always what they want to hear. I think maybe it was the self-control chapter, actually, now that I'm going back through, which has a really good marshmallow test picture.
No, yeah.
Thrown in there. Super
it's the same
cute.
style, though. Like the kids sitting there and no marshmallow for you.
I think that was the self-control chapter. I think maybe that was the one I was very engrossed in.
Well, I think that something that's especially students and developing behavior analysts really have to understand that escape and self-control and self-care, escape and self-care are not the same thing often.
No.
Very true.
Exactly.
That's well said.
Like self-care may actually mean I'm going to sort of give up some pleasantries because what's most important to me right now is focusing so that I can enjoy those things without them interfering in my life.
Yes.
And my progress later, because I don't have enough like fluency in this skill. So it's really important that I disrupt my own routine and get through X, Y, and Z first. And that's actually self-care, not I'm going to turn off the book and ignore everything because it's too hard.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed. It's not self-indulgence.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So basically this section, just because like always when we get to the last section of a book, we sort of start running out of recording time. But this really broke it down. This I think section had the most, here is the table. There is no table, but if there were going to be a table, like the last couple pages kind of have that table vibe of like, here are all the ways this book has talked about how consequences impact human behavior. And here's some examples of how this could be relevant to complex big systems. And then it sort of breaks it down into the chapter sections on everyday consequences, chapters on self-control, chapters on education and work, chapters on addiction, autism, and other conditions. And then finally, chapter on consequences on the grand scale, society, the long term, and the planet.
I'm glad that one was the ending one, because it really brings into play the 3 levels of selection that we talked about, right? And so she like mirrored Skinner's 3 levels of selection. She started off in that first part talking about that phylogenetic level, the level of the genes, and then the middle of the book was talking about, the level of operant, and the third level was this cultural selection. And so I just love that, and I'm sure she did it that way on purpose and she was like, I hope somebody notices, right? Because she doesn't say it.
Right, we noticed. Yeah.
But we noticed, right? The three parts, 3 levels of selection. And how they, interweave through each of the chapters. I just thought that was like real spot on.
Jackie, you know what? Speaking about the part I came to this part about, I forgot to mention endangered species, undercover crows, and the family dog, applications for animals. I totally forgot to even mention that was one of the chapters in this section, of which my favorite anecdotes were those about rats who learned to do mind detection, and they were so good they got licensed in mind detection.
Cool.
So basically they had to teach them how to fill out a form and pay their yearly licensing fee.
I'm sure.
You can still do that. Behavior analysts go and train those mice in Tanzania. We had a friend that did that for a while.
Yeah.
The mice are so
job.
light that they don't set off the mines as they detect them. So it's safer.
Yeah.
Too.
Alan, you mentioned kind of self-care or some parts of self-care, but let's all, if we have something else that was in one of these chapters, because we can't go into each chapter in detail because we're running low on time. Certainly, I said I loved the education chapter and really the discussion about the combination of rules and consequences being a key to behavior management. You can't just give kids rules and then have random consequences and expect to see a change in behavior. You can't just give them consequences and not tell them the rules and still see a pretty good change in behavior. However, why would you do that to the poor kids? Why not combine the two?
I love the folks who make these schools.
Mm-hmm.
That they're like, I'm going to build this from the ground up the way that it should be, and include like best educational practices and have really clearly laid out, contingencies and systems, and you get to see these things actually in action. Because in our day-to-day school system, it's a lot of murkiness that's going on in there. Shout out once again to Project Follow Through and Direct Instruction.
Yeah.
Those are mentioned here. So nothing that I didn't know necessarily in this chapter, but it's just like such good reminders, like all over the place. Like you start to think that contingencies don't really touch you and your day-to-day life in the way that they actually do. But contingencies control everything that we're doing. We just don't realize it. So it was a great reminder in that sense.
Like literally, we never stop responding and learn. Like it's just all the time.
Yeah.
I certainly appreciated the summaries on page 257 to 259 when talking about how are we going to save the planet, which again, knowing now after reading the book that Dr. Schneider's really interested in climate change and ecological change, the idea of like, let's do a quick summary of all the concepts we talked about, the idea of adding and subtracting consequences. How do we use signals? How do we use schedules? How do we set up commitment? How do we use our experiences, so kind of learning history? How do we set up social support? How do we use models, right? And for each of these and this is how you could use it for talking about something like climate change or recycling or whatever kind of the ecological overfishing, right? With ideas like, well, you could have variable rewards for how we dispose of our trash, or we could use sexy Robert Redford as a model of good environmental behavior. I added the sexy. I don't know Susan Schneider's feelings on Robert Redford other than a ecological friendly model.
I think he's sexy too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other example? Oh, Alan.
Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure she doesn't mention it. I would have loved to hear her talk about maybe the example of places, I think in Japan and some places in Europe where littering was a problem, that they actually took away trash cans and it improved littering because the societal pressure not to be the one that litters, because there was no opportunity to be like, oh, it blew out of the trash. Like it was very clear that what you took in was what you're responsible for taking out. Would have loved to talking about that. I feel like she would have done a really good job of breaking that down as counterintuitive and part of things. Because it just came to mind because she talks about littering some, but she didn't have enough time, and I understand that. But it's sort of one of those, the absence of that brought that to mind, which she talks about earlier in another chapter, that the absence of something brings it to mind.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do some final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up with the final line. Let's go around the horn. Dinah, why don't we start with you? And by horn, I mean the person sitting next to me.
What's my takeaway?
What's your takeaway? What are you going to do with this book now that you've read it?
I think if you have someone in your family who enjoys these types of anecdotal-based books, I mean, no, it's not anecdotes though. It's storytelling is what it is, but it's based in science, right? But if you have someone who enjoys a storytelling book in the style of, let's say, Malcolm Gladwell or Oliver Sacks, they might enjoy this book. And maybe you have people in your family that are always like, tell me what you do again. I really don't get it. This could be the book for them.
What do I do? Everything. Read this book and find out how.
Yeah. So, very often the sticking point for people fully understanding what it is, not what we do, but what it is that's like unique about behavior analysis is their understanding of the idea that consequences are at the root of all responding and behavior change, right? So this would be the book to give someone to try to help them really understand that critical point of our theoretical views. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, this is coming out after the holidays.
Yeah. I like the cover. It's Domino's. And I always judge a book by its cover. I'm not going to lie. I usually say this in the beginning. And I love this cover, and I love that the science of consequences in black, and then the other parts in red. And I love the cover, and I appreciate how the book flows without getting too boring, right? It's hard to read a nonfiction book, I think. And so this was my morning read, and because I read nonfiction in the morning, so I want to put it down. But I did not feel like it was so boring that I was like looking for the next page, right? I thought it was entertaining. I was laughing. I thought the subtitles were good. The examples were great. And so I think this would be a great book for anyone that's interested in like delving in, right? As those undergraduates love, if I taught an intro to psych class, this would be the book I would give them.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think she makes a lot of what we do accessible and could give people a lot of like talking points. It's like, well, what do you mean it's what you do is like these birds? It's like, well, like we as humans are responsive to signals and we have certain drives. And I think that I like in some of her examples in toward the end, like when she talks about ADHD, that although there's reasons that the research needs to be improved, that like the idea of changing the biology and applying behavior science together can really improve outcomes for people more than just focusing on one or the other. That she talks about like in ADHD intervention, for instance, and I like that she came full circle with some of that, and really that's what we do is hope to make our interventions work better and make to help have people have better outcomes in life. So I think she did a good job.
All right. And well, that brings us to the last line of the book, because no matter whether it's nonfiction or fiction, if you don't have a last ending line, your book ain't nothing. So how did this ending line go? It was okay. It was a lot of Skinner quote. So maybe not my favorite ending line, but it was definitely within the themes of the book. So in that case, it definitely matches and didn't leave me sad that I had read the book, because I'd enjoyed a lot of what came before. And then it ended fine. And I could go back and find the sections of the book and the anecdotes and the research-based anecdotes, I should say, that were of interest to share with others. So here it is. This is page 260 of the book. Consequences will be part of humanity's grandest endeavor. How can we best use what we know? Skinner said, regard no practice as immutable. Change and be ready to change again. Accept no eternal verity. Experiment. And when we fail, the real mistake is to stop trying. Let's keep learning. Let's never stop trying. The end. And it says the end. And the book closes. And it's the end of the movie.
Then there's some
and that was The Science of Consequences by Susan Schneider. And that's the end of our book club podcast. Yay! Thank you all out there so much for listening. We hope you are hearing this whenever you're hearing this. If you're hearing this in the early 2025, then thank you so much for supporting us on Patreon. Don't forget to get a link in your patron feed for 2 CEs for listening to this podcast. You get 2 CEs for no additional charge. Thank you so much. If you are hearing this in the far future, you perhaps are hearing this on the free feed, and that's great. We're so glad you subscribed to the show. But if you'd like to get those CEs, you're going to need your code words. But you're also, if you want them for no additional charge. You would need to join us on patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. All right. I'm going to give everyone the last of those code words. It is Shire. Shire. It's where Sam and Mr. Frodo came from. Mr. Frodo. I should have done the whole episode like that. It's so good, right?
We already did that one once, and no.
Oh.
I was like, wrong accent. So.
Oh, sorry. All you have to remember is Shire. All right. Well,
You're not as hairy as the hobbits, but otherwise I'm fully living hobbit life.
I definitely had a second breakfast this morning, and I named it as I tacked it second breakfast. Or was it a man? No, it was a tax. I just grabbed it. I didn't need to ask. All right. Well, that's the end of our book club. Thank you, Diana and Jackie and Alan, for being here as always. Thanks to Dr. Susan Schneider for joining my discussion earlier in the episode. Appreciate that. And thank you all so much for listening to the show. Don't forget to click the link if you'd like to get CEs to go back to our webpage where you can find all of our previous book clubs and all that jazz. Some thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for our recording our intro song, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial song, Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his work, and of course, again, Dr. Susan Schneider for writing this book. We'll be back with our spring book club on, I believe we're doing Divergent Minds. We'll be back for that in just a few months' time. But until then, keep responding. Bye!
Bye!
Bye.